Dzień dobry Państwu, Michał Jelonek. Zapraszam na komentarz mediów narodowych, w którym porozmawiamy o sytuacji, jaka ma miejsce w Republice Południowej Afryki. Serdecznie zapraszam. Today I'm hosting a special guest from South Africa, Roodt. Hello, Dan.
Hello.
Dan, you are an author, publisher, commentator. If I forget something, that's the time to introduce yourself more closely to our viewers, our audience.
Yes, I've been involved in the struggle for Afrikaner rights and identity for the last 20 years at least. And before that, yes, I was quite an active literary author. And I also lived in Europe for about 6 or 7 years in Paris. But over the last 2 decades, I watched with alarm as our rights were being undermined and minimized to the extent that today we are second-class citizens in our own country.
Okay. So first of all, I would like to ask you how the situation in South Africa looks like in general, and what's your opinion about blacks and white society problems?
Well, at the moment, even in the mainstream media in South Africa, there are 2 main issues. The one is the extreme violence that we are suffering in the form of farm murders, often accompanied by sadistic torture and massacres of entire families. And the other big issue is the impending or coming expropriation without compensation of farmland, as they call it. Now, in actual fact, it's just a simple confiscation of people's property without paying them anything in return. And at the beginning of the year, the ruling ANC, South African Communist Party Alliance, together with an even more extremist left-wing party called the Economic Freedom Fighters under Julius Malema, they voted a motion in Parliament that they were going to do this expropriation without compensation. And since then, the process has been hurtling along and it's been expedited. And it seems that they are really going to do it. Some people believe that they won't make the same mistake as our northern neighbor Zimbabwe did, where they did the same thing, invaded the land of white farmers, which then shortly afterwards led to hyperinflation and famine in the country. But it seems that they haven't learned at all from the mistakes of Zimbabwe, and they want to do the same thing in South Africa.
Okay. So if you are talking about crime issues, for example, how it looks like, what are the numbers, and how do you comment this situation?
Yes, South Africa is in the top 5 most violent countries in the world. And it wasn't always like that, but it has developed like that since the early 90s, when these Marxist terrorist movements, with the support of the Western countries, took over our country. And immediately there was a breakdown of law and order, to the extent that today we are the number 1, where they call us the rape capital of the world. More women are raped in South Africa than in any other country. They're talking about even 1.5 million per annum. Of course, the number that's reported to the police is a lot lower, but it still puts us in the highest category. And then there's the issue of murder. We have more murders than Brazil, which has about 3 or 4 times our population. So, in raw numbers, you're looking at about 20,000 murders per annum, plus about 30,000 cases of manslaughter. So you're looking at about 50,000 unnatural deaths per year. And if you add them all up since 1994, when the ANC SA Communist Party regime took over, it's now running over 500,000 people, which is in all, yeah, it would be internationally considered to be a genocide. You know, so many people having died violently and in an unnatural fashion. And there's another shocking figure, and that is that only 8% of murder cases are ever solved. So the police are so incompetent or unmotivated that you literally can get away with murder in South Africa. 92% of murder cases are never solved and never lead to a conviction.
Does your government react to it in any way?
Well, not in any really concerted way. They do talk about it, and they lament the fact that the murder rate is so high, but then immediately they become, when they are criticized about that, they become very defensive, and they blame other people, and they blame the past, and they blame our history, and they say, oh, it's because of the inequality. And in most of the mainstream media in South Africa, that seems to be the explanation that they've got for the state of affairs, is that there's too much inequality in South Africa. So if we had to suddenly become a very equal society, or they had to institute some form of, communist egalitarianism in South Africa, then immediately all these murders and other crimes would stop, which is, of course, absurd. And if you compare our statistics to those of America, in cities where there is a majority black population, it's very comparable. So it seems to be there's an ethnic factor at work in all of this.
Okay, so if you have to compare these all crimes, how many of them have been done by black people?
Well, you probably all of them, or 99% of them. You know, the number of murders committed by white people, you can count in a year, you can count them probably on one hand, and the media always report that on the front page. They don't care much about the thousands and thousands of murders committed by blacks, but if a white person commits a murder, then it's front page news. You know, it's so exceptional that it is front page news. There are other issues around that as well. For example, but the paradox in South Africa is that there are racial statistics on everything, on income, on jobs. You know, they can tell you exactly how many white engineers there are, and how many black engineers, how many white accountants, how many black accountants, and the income of each racial group and ethnic group in South Africa. Those statistics are freely available, and they are issued by the government statistics department. But there are no statistics broken down by race on things like murder and rape and robbery and other crimes. Now, what does that tell you? That they're trying to hide this from us. But if you are you don't even have to be clever, you just have to use your common sense, and then you can actually use all of their other statistics, and especially where people live and so on, where the different racial groups live, and the number of crimes committed in that area, and then you soon realize that the areas with by far the most crime are the black areas and also the colored areas in the Cape. And then there's another interesting statistic, and that is that less than 2% of inmates in prison in South Africa are white, whereas the white adult population is probably about 10% of the total population. And And of the coloreds, for example, they constitute also about 10% of the population, but they've got 17% of the inmates. And the Indians are also fairly low. I think they are also at about 1% of the prison population, but then they are, as a percentage of the total population, they're probably running at around 2 or 3%. So it shows you that the whites are least prone to committing crime. They're least prone to getting convicted for a crime. Whereas the prison population by far is composed of blacks and coloreds. And that fact, you can look it up on the prison, on the department, we so-called Department of Correctional Services in South Africa on their website, and you've got it there. And you've got also the other stats published by the government itself. And if you put the picture together, you see that whites are the innocent victims of black violence, exactly as it is in other big American cities with a large black population, such as Detroit or parts of Washington, south side of Chicago, and so on.
Before our interview, we were talking about doing business in South Africa. And could you please explain how it works when white Afrikaners try to establish his own company, start doing business, how it looks like?
Yes, there are very strict laws in place that impose racial quotas on business. There are even racial quotas in sport. But in business, if you have a very small, or say a one-man business, you can get away by just employing yourself and your family. But as soon as your turnover rises above a certain level, then you have to have a black partner in the business. And usually that would mean that he would own the majority share in the business. And in practice, you have to give it to him. He's not going to buy a share in the business. You have to just give it to him. And therefore, he gets a free ride and a free lunch from you. And, for the larger companies, the same holds. They also give away shares to blacks, to members of the black elite connected with the government, and also to the black employees. And currently, there's a major controversy around one of the biggest South African companies that was started by us, by our engineers in years gone by, the company Sasol, which is very famous for making petrol or fuel from coal. And in this company, they are giving shares away to the employees, but the whites are not allowed to get shares. Only the blacks get shares, not the whites. Even if the blacks are richer, have a higher income than the whites are still not allowed to get shares because of their race. And you find that sort of logic and mentality throughout the system. We are, a lot of the things that they say about apartheid, historical apartheid, were actually not true, but that term, as it is understood internationally, applies very much to the system at the moment, where the whites are on the receiving end of this anti-white racism and discrimination.
So it is kind of pathology, let's say.
Yes, it is a pathology, and a lot of the murders and the violence that are taking place in South Africa are pathological and sadistic, but they are also ideologically and politically fueled by government pronouncements and statements, and the anti-white attitude of the government, which encourages this violence.
Is it true that former President Zuma was involved in smuggling cigarettes?
Yes, he and his family were involved in smuggling cigarettes, but he himself has also had about 580 cases of corruption reported against him, and there are all kinds of court cases going on, but because the government also pays for his legal fees, you can almost postpone these cases indefinitely. And by the time he gets found guilty, he will be already dead, because it's going to take such a long time to go through all the courts and all the appeal processes. And he's got an unlimited amount of money, the taxpayers' money.
So he has not been sentenced?
No, he hasn't been sentenced because he can hire all the lawyers in the country to work for him. Okay. With the government and the taxpayers' money.
Okay. Dan, you have strong views on the preservation of Afrikaners, African culture, which has led to some controversy in liberal media. And what kind of controversy we could talking about?
Well, I have a few enemies in the mainstream media who have attacked me in the past and called me all kinds of names. But there was one incident in 2005 when I was supposed to I was invited to talk about a novel I'd written at the University of Stellenbosch in a bookshop close to the campus. And then the leftists on the campus tried to prevent me from speaking there, and about 15 of them signed a petition, and they said that the university should ban me from coming onto the grounds. And they also threatened me with violence. They said they were going to go to the black area in Stellenbosch and get a whole mob of people to come and attack me. But then a couple of farmers drove all the way from the north of the country, almost 2,000 kilometers far, to come and protect me. So it was, but it drew a lot of media attention, and it sort of ended up on the 7 o'clock news on a Saturday. And I did finally talk about my book at that festival. But the upshot of it was that the festival was afterwards has been too scared to invite me ever again, because they know they're scared that the leftists will again cause a controversy like that. And I was also, at one time, I used to write a column in the main Afrikaans Sunday newspaper. But then I also commented after a baby of 1 year old on her birthday, together with her mother and her grandmother, were massacred in Pretoria by some blacks. I wrote a very strongly worded column about that. And the column was never published by this newspaper, but they immediately fired me for that, because they found it was too strongly worded. I mean, they could have edited some of the terms that I used, or maybe some of the ideas I put forward. But it shows you to what extent that people are scared of just reporting the truth in South Africa and saying the truth. In this case, this baby, her name was Kayla Rawsthorne. She was killed on her first birthday together with her mother and her grandmother, and I think the mother was raped as well in the process. This horrific crime that took place, and if you try and speak out against that, then you are silenced, or your column is taken away, and so on.
Is that true? Because I have heard that many blacks who remember the apartheid nowadays express their opinion that during apartheid the situation in South Africa was better. How do you comment this statement?
Well, I think they are right, because and there are many of them who say that, because the only people who really benefit from the current system are the kind of nomenclatura that we've got, the black nomenclatura in South Africa, who drive very expensive cars, and they've got government connections and high incomes, and they are actually looting the state coffers as well as the publicly owned companies. They are literally stealing billions and billions of rands and dollars from the state and of public money. And for them, it is a paradise. They are living Hollywood lives, but at our expense. But for the ordinary black person out there, the unemployment rate is the highest it's ever been. It's over 30%, depending on which method you use to calculate it, and their standard of living has not improved, and they are, a lot of them are also victims of criminal violence. So I think they would prefer the order of the old system, and even if the old system was not that democratic, although it's not true to say that it was undemocratic either. For them, in many cases, it was better. I mean, the state hospitals were also better run. The schools were better run. There are even, some of the left-wing black leaders who have said that in public, that the schools were better the black schools were better under apartheid than now.
So what do you think? Is there any chance to all people who try to fight against multiculturalism, communism also, and genocide of people in South Africa, genocide of white people?
We are experiencing something akin to genocide, because a lot of us are being killed and our farmers are being massacred. And our culture is being repressed because they are banning our language at the universities, and they're threatening to do it even now at the schools. But I think there is always hope, as long as there's a will, there's a way. And in the recent past, people have become very disillusioned with the system, and the legitimacy of the system is no longer as it was just after 1994, when everybody said this was going to be wonderful. People are now seeing through the system, and that it's corrupt and it's not really suited for South Africa. But I think the main problem is that we've had very weak leaders for the last 20 or 30 years in politics. They've been very afraid to speak out, and they are all politically correct, and they have not really shown the way forward to the people. And it's now up to us to find that way forward. And I think there are two ways in which South Africa could again have a future or get back to its previous magnificence, because it was a magnificent country. It was the most developed country in Africa, and we were in the top 20 economies in the world. And to get back there are two ways. I think the one would be a kind of a partial return to the old system of having maybe a parliament with 3 or 4 houses, and more of a distributed system of power, and a federal system or a confederal system. Or the other way would be for us to break away with our own territory and found a new republic for the Afrikaner people in some corner of the country. And people have been talking about that for a while as well, and there have been movements and groups and parties who have supported that idea. So I think, both those avenues could be pursued, and we'll find out which one will be the right one. And I personally feel that, especially during this visit in Poland, it is so marvelous to see how you as a people live in a homogeneous country with one race, one language, one culture, one religion even, and how peaceful it is, and how people trust one another. I mean, you can leave something. I saw that even the bicycles are not locked on the street now. We would never leave a bicycle on the street unlocked, because it would only be a few minutes and then it would be stolen. And there have been liberal surveys done in the United States in various cities, where they found that in the ones that are homogeneous white, people trust one another a lot more than in the multicultural cities. Multiculturalism destroys trust between people, and you end up with everybody being afraid and distrustful and, paranoid about crime and violence. And this is precisely what we are experiencing in South Africa today. We're constantly afraid and, we are apprehensive about being attacked, being robbed, being killed wherever we go in the country. I mean, even my daughter tells me that it's terrible for her to go out and park a car somewhere on the way to a restaurant because she never knows if she'll be attacked on the way. And even though she's looking forward to going out with a boyfriend or something, there's always this lurking fear that something is going to happen to you, once you're out of your house or even inside your house, because many people get attacked in their homes during these home invasions where robbers and these attackers simply arrive. Sometimes they don't even take anything, they just kill the people.
Do you have the death penalty if invaders come to your house and then, let's say, you shoot him? What's going further?
Well, we have, under our law, traditionally, we've always had the right to self-defense. But in cases where people have shot the attackers, sometimes they've had to go to court to defend themselves, and they sometimes get charged with murder after having defended themselves. But normally, usually the judge would listen to them. But there has been a deterioration in the legal system as well. And I no longer trust the court system. And the very highest court in the country, the Constitutional Court, that is a completely communist court, and it itself, without even a vote in Parliament or anything, it abolished the death penalty. It just made a ruling that the Constitution, as it is now, prohibits the death penalty, and they made that ruling, and that was it, and the death penalty was taken away. So even the most heinous crimes committed in South Africa by horrible criminals, they cannot be given the death penalty. And in practice, a lot of these murderers, I mean, they may get a life sentence or something like that, but because the prisons are so full, they are let out after 5 or 10 years. And then they go and commit another crime. Or they are arrested for one crime, and then they are, while the court case is going on, they are let out again on ridiculously small amounts of bail, say like maybe a few hundred zlotys, and they would be out on bail again, and they would commit another horrific crime. I mean, there was a case like that where a black rapist in Pretoria was given a bail of 200 zlotys, and then he went out and he attacked a girl, a young Christian virgin of 18 years old in Pretoria. He raped her, he stabbed her to death, he left her for dead, but she survived. But she had to have operations afterwards, and her entire life was destroyed by that. But her father successfully then sued the police department in court for damages because they had let this criminal out. And they were awarded quite a large amount of damages that the police department settled with them. But I think but it can never compensate for what this girl had gone through during this attack.
I wonder, what is your opinion if it comes to Janusz Waluś case?
Well, personally, I've met Janusz Waluś in prison because the wife of Clive Derby Lewis, who was imprisoned with him, once invited me to go on a Sunday to see them in prison, and then I spoke to both of them, and he strikes me as quite a decent and principled man who took a certain decision in his life which may have been wrong, or may have been extreme under the circumstances, to assassinate the head of the Communist Party at the time, Chris Hani. But number one, he has purged his sentence. He has now been in prison for 25 years. So, and the prison authorities have recommended him for parole, so he should be let out now. But for political and ideological reasons, the regime is keeping him behind bars, which is actually against the law now. Secondly, Chris Hani was not an ordinary innocent person. He was a killer. He was a terrorist who had commanded various terrorist attacks on innocent civilians in South Africa, and therefore his act could be seen as a form of retribution against Hani, which also is, to my mind, an extenuating circumstance which should have been taken into account with his sentencing. And something else that was very unfair in his case was the fact that he was not given amnesty, whereas thousands of the ANC's terrorists and killers and people who had attacked innocent, placed bombs in bars or supermarkets or on the street, killing innocent people, they were all amnestied. They didn't have to go to prison. But he, out of sheer spitefulness, he and Clive Derby Lewis were not given amnesty by the so-called Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And he had to go to prison for so many years. So it's really, under the circumstances and given the historical conditions that pertained at the time, it was very unfair towards both of them. And in my opinion, he should be let out now. It's still very unfair to keep him in prison.
What you would like to say to people in Europe?
I would say to people in Europe that, as my friend Martin Bosma of the Dutch Freedom Party wrote in his book on South Africa, that we are the canary in the coal mine. We are the first European nation in Africa and in the world to be at risk of dying as a result of multiculturalism and being dominated by a large non-white majority. And the same thing, if we can't stop it there, ultimately the same fate will befell Europe and North America and Australia and the entire Western world, because the same processes that brought us down are also active or operative in Europe and in North America. So, they should watch what's going on there, because that represents their future. It's our present, but it's your future. And to my mind, we should try and work together in order to at least save ourselves, but also save the whole European world or the pan-European world in the wider sense. And we've got a lot of work to do if we are going to avert this catastrophe that is threatening all of us, where we would really descend into barbarism, where your life is no longer safe, your possessions and your property are no longer safe, and your children have no future. And that's the sort of conditions that are already pertaining in South Africa.
Dan, thank you for the interview, and I hope it would not be the first and the last meeting. Thank you very much.
Well, and thank you for inviting me, and I really feel honored to be in Poland and to be having these kinds of conversations with people with values and convictions like you do.
Thank you so much, Dan. Państwu dziękujemy dzisiaj za uwagę. To był komentarz Mediów Narodowych.